In The Lost Daughter, a college professor named Leda, played by Olivia Colman, goes in search of solace on a vacation and becomes preoccupied with a young mother on a beach who is struggling with her small child. Flowing seamlessly between past and present, exploring psychology with finesse and nuance, the film delves unapologetically into the pressures and expectations of motherhood and examines infidelity, transgression, and shame. It has a troubling atmosphere, replete with social tensions, uncertain motivations, and seems to be leading portentously to some kind of reckoning or revelation. This makes the film such a compelling watch, because there is a feeling all the various plot threads are going to come together in some intricate way, or the past and present will collapse when some buried secret, unresolved or perhaps not even acknowledged, erupts into the narrative, disrupting and changing everything. The strange thing with The Lost Daughter, however, is the lack of payoff, given the often ambiguous development or faltering tense nature of Leda's interaction with the characters around her. She meets a pregnant woman on the beach, and it is almost impossible for the viewer to discern if this character is relatable or sympathetic, cynically curious, passively aggressive, or undermining, and this dynamic barely shifts throughout the entire film. There is also Ed Harris, playing the character of Lyle, who seems likable and sympathetic enough, but who also might be broken in some way. He too is developed as a character, with long scenes of exposition about his life, leading the viewer to speculate that he has some deeper role to play, or that he might become more involved with Leda. Then there is the character of Will, a student working a part-time job on the beach. We see him off and on throughout the film, and this too seems to escalate in some way, where he sits down for a drink with Leda, and even seems to become weirdly flirtatious or to have some other motivation. Then there is the young mother struggling with her child. She has a brash and sometimes cavalier husband, and there seems to be the notion their relationship is collapsing, or the husband might be volatile in some way. So there is a hint of danger, or at least tension here too. Now and again, Leda calls up one of her two daughters, and since we see in the numerous flashbacks that there are two girls, and she is only communicating with one, there is a further tension here that something might have happened to the other, and there are some unresolved cross-purposes or even trauma between mother and remaining daughter. Finally, there is the doll that Leda takes and keeps and dwells upon as a symbol of her troubled and often selfish motherhood. The family of the girl who has lost the doll are focused on finding it in a way that seems completely disproportionate to its worth. This even escalates to plastering trees with posters of the doll in the hope of information. This leads the viewer to think that the doll perhaps has some kind of outsized significance beyond what Leda feels. Lastly, there is the tension that Leda might be discovered with the doll, leading to some kind of anxious confrontation. With all of these threads set up, the film seems primed to draw the viewer into a third act full of revelations, twists, and episodes that might, at the very least, resolve some character arcs in some way. Perhaps I, like most people, have become so indoctrinated by the tropes of Hollywood and story writing that acts and arcs and setup are to be naturally expected, even in a psychological drama as wrought and intimate and character-driven as this. But it is still a little weird to have what seems like so much investment and setup peter out. Apparently this was all about the journey through the past for Coleman's character and a journey of discovery for us that doesn't really have that much to do with her shadowy holiday experience. The pregnant woman on the beach, whose motivations weren't especially clear, that's pretty much how it ends at the conclusion of the film. The character of Lyle might have offered the proposition of romantic solace, or may have had some other kind of secret pain to be revealed in an act of kinship or companionship. But perhaps to emphasize the isolation of Leda's shame, nothing really much of anything happens with him either. The young hospitality worker on the beach, who at one point gazes fondly at Leda and tells her she's beautiful, and whose character seems to have a vaguely salacious quality, only rarely ends up serving a fairly bland and functional role in moving the plot along. The woman with the child on the beach starts off more or less friendly, if a little standoffish, and when it is revealed that Leda has her baby's doll, she becomes irate in a way that is fairly understandable, though this does escalate to a nasty graphic moment involving a large hatpin. But other than that, there are no revelations, no surprises, no unexpected emotional showdown or reckoning, just her storming out of the flat. And the doll, which seemed to preoccupy a whole family to the point that they expend much of their holiday waging a campaign of flyers and dogged searching, is just a doll, which despite all its projected emotional significance and preoccupation for Leda, is an incongruous focal point for so many others. The question, therefore, is would this film have necessarily been better if there had been some intricately plotted, developed and executed elements, expanding from the novel source material, developing these threads in a way that made them interconnect or cohere in ways that were surprising, compelling, or that made the viewer retroactively go back through the film in their mind to appreciate how the groundwork was laid? The answer, I suppose, is probably not. It wouldn't have added to or enhanced the psychological richness of Leda's experience. But there is nonetheless a slightly hollow feeling, not of being cheated so much, but of having invested a lot of energy as a viewer in keeping track of and trying to assess or decipher motivations that, in the end, weren't there and didn't pay off to anything much, and that the incredible atmosphere of this fantastic film was at least slightly reliant on the fact its tensions were built on ambiguities, possible threats, the closing in some way, of something, be it the designs of others, or a truth that can no longer remain repressed, or the inevitable revelation of Leda's preoccupation with the doll, leading to some harsh consequences, or even, perhaps, the revelation of the death of one of Leda's daughters. When none of this eventuates, it kind of leaves you, as a viewer, feeling that you did a lot of heavy lifting on behalf of the film. And that's why, although I loved it very much, and Coleman's performance is one of the best of her already illustrious career, and although the film is character-driven, and in particular illuminating corners of the experience of women and mothers that makes it a unique and exceptional watch, it is not a film that I would want to watch again, given, as it actually turns out, many of the interactions are just that. Understandable, relatable, and not necessarily compelling characters just interacting with each other, with all the awkwardness, glimmers of empathy, and conventionality of real life. Grounded realism in film is great, but if it seems to be implying or portending something more and relies on that to a certain degree for its tensions, then it leaves a slight tinge of indifference amidst the appreciation of an excellent work.